This quarterback class has the potential to be one of the best classes as a whole in recent history. So let's dive into this class and talk early rankings and profiles. At the very top, the consensus quarterback one is Bryce Young out of Alabama, who really doesn't have any negatives on his profile. He's a 2-year starter with amazing production both years, with almost 4,900 yards passing and 47 touchdowns in 2021, and then 3,300 yards and 32 touchdowns in 2022 with a career total of only 12 interceptions. He effectively played less than 30 games in college and totaled over 8,000 yards and 80 touchdowns. For reference, those are very similar numbers to Joe Burrow's combined totals in his 2 years at LSU as a starter, and Young missed a couple games this past season. He has elite accuracy, elite pocket presence, the footwork, the instincts, the ability to not only avoid the rush, but also work as a dual threat when needed. He has everything that you want from a quarterback. Now, he doesn't necessarily have the arm strength like other quarterbacks in this class, but he'll make those 50 to 60 yard throws just fine. And like I said, there really isn't a true knock on his game and the way that he plays on the field. The one issue people have with him is, of course, his size, being listed at 6 foot 194 pounds, but I'd imagine he's probably more like 5'10", 5'11" at the combine. But guess what? I don't care at all. Literally do not care. If you watch what Young can do on the field, you shouldn't care at all about his height because he's literally producing like an elite quarterback. Kyler Murray is 5'10". He's doing just fine. What about Russell Wilson? He's 5'11", a shade over 200, Hall of Fame career. Drew Brees was 6 foot on the dot. How'd that work out for him? If you're knocking Young because of his size, I think you need to reevaluate what you're looking at in a quarterback prospect, because if Young doesn't meet every other criteria, then I don't really know who would. Rookie quarterback 1, and it's not even close. Now, rookie QB 2, also not really that close, is CJ Stroud out of Ohio State. Now, Stroud has a lot of what Young has to offer as a quarterback as well. He has excellent accuracy, excellent pocket presence. His arm strength is definitely better than Young's too, but he doesn't have everything that Bryce Young has, namely the rushing ability. Stroud is athletic and does have good vertical speed, but he never really showed that in college. In fact, I think he's almost too immobile in the pocket to where that's a dimension of his game that defenses don't really have to worry about him moving out of the pocket and scrambling, or really moving out of the pocket just in general to avoid sacks. He did put some of that elusiveness on tape against Georgia this year, which was amazing to see. I just wish that we saw more of it throughout his career. So that's really what's lacking when you compare Stroud to Young, where Stroud is basically 95% of Young as a passer, but doesn't really offer the upside of real mobility. The other main difference between the two were the weapons each quarterback was throwing to over the last 2 years, because their overall production is basically the same. Stroud totaled 8,100 yards, 85 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. Young totaled 8,300 yards, 80 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. It's just insane production from the two quarterbacks. That's why they're QB1 and QB2 in this class. However, when you compare the fact that Young did that with Jameson Williams and John Mechie last year, and then a collection of Ja'Cory Brooks, Jermaine Burton, and Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield in 2022, those numbers are wildly more impressive than Stroud, who had Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Jackson Smith-Njigba last year in 2021, and then the duo of Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka in 2022. That's not even close to a fair fight for Bryce Young, yet he was still able to match Stroud across the board with far lesser talented receivers. And that gives me way more confidence in Young's ability to transition quicker to the NFL than Stroud's. But with that said, I'm still very confident that Stroud is a capable top 15 fantasy quarterback for the large majority of his career, a la like a Kirk Cousins or a Derek Carr. But Stroud and Young, those two are locked and loaded for sure, without a doubt, the QB1 and QB2 in this class. And after them, things get a bit dicey, and we got to start weighing how bad the cons are for these prospects compared to some enormous upside. And there's probably no better example of that than Anthony Richardson out of Florida. You want to talk about ceiling? Well, how does the next Michael Vick or Cam Newton or Lamar Jackson sound to you? I mean, pretty good, right? That's Anthony Richardson. From a pure athleticism standpoint, Richardson is at the top of this class, and his rushing ability is so enticing from a fantasy perspective. 650 rushing yards, 9 touchdowns in 12 games in 2022, with a highlight reel full of huge runs, touchdown runs that would rival what Justin Fields did in Chicago this past season. Pair all that with a cannon of an arm and the ability to create big plays through the air as well, and that's your recipe for Cam Newton or Lamar Jackson 2.0. But there are holes, massive, crippling holes in his profile that absolutely terrify me. I mean, number one, he's effectively a one-year starter. Now, he had a couple games in 2021 where he split time with Emory Jones, but he was basically Taysom Hill for Florida that year, and so he started the majority of his games in 2022. One-year quarterbacks scare me when the recent list of guys looks like Mitch Trubisky, Dwayne Haskins, Mark Sanchez, most recently even Trey Lance. Those are some of the worst quarterback picks in recent history, all made on one and done college starters. The list also includes Kyler Murray and Cam Newton, but Kyler threw for 4,300 yards and 42 touchdowns with a 69% completion percentage, while also rushing for 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns. Cam Newton also had a monster season with 30 passing touchdowns, a 66% completion percentage, to pair with almost 1,500 rushing yards and 20 rushing touchdowns. Those numbers are nowhere near what Anthony Richardson did in 2022. Another major issue is that completion percentage, as Richardson had an abysmal 53.8, we'll just call it 54% completion percentage in 2022. Over the last 20 years, the only two quarterbacks coming out of college drafted in round one with a sub 55% completion percentage were Jake Locker and Kyle Buller. You're really behind the eight ball coming into the NFL if you're not an accurate passer in college, and seldomly do quarterbacks improve in that area in the NFL. I think this is mainly where the comps to Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson come from, because both of them were under 60% completion percentage in college too as raw passers, and they've worked out well in the NFL and for fantasy. But again, I have to disagree a little bit here and point out that both players, A, had more experience as starters in college, both had better individual seasons as passers, with Josh Allen throwing for 3,200 yards and 28 touchdowns his sophomore year, and Lamar Jackson throwing for back-to-back seasons of 3,500 yards and 27 plus touchdowns. Not to mention that the Lamar comps are also based on their rushing abilities, except Lamar, again, back-to-back seasons of 1,500 plus yards and 18 plus rushing touchdowns, nowhere close to Richardson's numbers in 2022. And the third issue with Richardson's profile is his touchdown to interception ratio. Richardson had under a 2-to-1 touchdown interception ratio in 2022, which again puts him on a really bad list of first-round quarterbacks like Daniel Jones, EJ Manuel, Christian Ponder, Vince Young, Jason Campbell, and again, Jake Locker and Kyle Buller. The best names on this list are Matthew Stafford, Matt Ryan, and Jay Cutler, but a 30% hit rate isn't what I'm looking for with my first round rookie pick in Dynasty. I know all this just sounds like all I'm doing is just looking at box scores, but I'm telling you guys, scouting quarterbacks on film is really, really hard. But a really simple line to draw for success in the NFL is success in college by being an accurate passer who throws lots of touchdowns and not a lot of interceptions, and that is just not Anthony Richardson. So he's going to be a guy that I will just happily let someone else grab in my rookie drafts. If I miss out, then I miss out, but if he's a bust, then I didn't fall for that trap. The player I'm more likely to take the shot on, because I believe he actually has a better chance at hitting than Anthony Richardson and will also probably be cheaper than Anthony Richardson to acquire, is actually Will Levis. Now, I know I probably just lost a lot of people by saying that, but stick with me a minute. Let me explain, because on film, Levis has a lot of the same upside that Richardson has. He has a cannon of an arm, probably the strongest in the entire class. He has excellent mobility, similar rushing upside to Richardson. He actually has a really fast and smooth release when throwing as well, and I think he's actually underrated in terms of how accurate he actually is. So he has all the same upside as Anthony Richardson in my opinion, but he comes with a lot less baggage than Richardson in terms of the negatives and the holes in his profile. Number one, Levis has more experience as a starter, playing 2 full seasons with Kentucky, racking up 5,000 yards, 43 touchdowns in those 2 seasons, while averaging 66% completion percentage and 8.2 yards per attempt. Number two, I just said it, a career 66% completion percentage puts him in a much nicer list of past first-round quarterbacks that, yeah, still includes guys like Mark Sanchez, Tim Tebow, Matt Leinart, Sam Darnold, Blake Bortles, but it also adds in Phillip Rivers, Marcus Mariota, Carson Wentz, Ben Roethlisberger, Justin Herbert, Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes. That overall is just a much nicer list to be on than what Anthony Richardson has with his completion percentage comps. And number three, he does have the same touchdown to interception ratio problem as Anthony Richardson with 43 touchdowns to 23 interceptions at Kentucky. But I would like to add that a good handful of those picks weren't really Levis's fault. I mean, they were bouncing off receivers' hands back to a defensive back. One of them, the receiver got tackled like halfway through the catch. The ball just floated in the air for what seemed like 10 seconds. There's a good 4 to 5 interceptions that are like that, to where his ratio looks nicer and actually gets above 2 to 1 if those interceptions were actually just completions or even just incompletions. But don't get me wrong, those interceptions still count. I'm not going to disregard them. And I think that that leads me to Levis's biggest issue, or maybe a pair of issues, which is inconsistency and trying to do too much to make a play. This is really where the Josh Allen comps come into play, because even when Allen got into the league, he was still very inconsistent early on and had some just like mind-blowingly stupid plays because he's trying to do too much with the ball. That's exactly what Levis puts on film as well. We can point to Levis at his best, I mean, which is probably the Tennessee game back in 2021, 372 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, plus another 2 touchdowns on the ground. He absolutely torched Tennessee that week and looked like a top 3 pick in the NFL. Even 2 weeks before that, he looked great against Georgia, even if the raw stat line wasn't as gaudy as Tennessee's, but he still threw for 202. But then just a year later, Tennessee 2022 is a completely different Will Levis. Didn't even pass for 100 yards, threw 3 interceptions, had negative 22 rushing yards because of how many sacks he took. That's Levis at his worst, and those games pop up just as much as his great ones, which is really infuriating when trying to figure Levis out. With all that said though, I do believe that Levis has a better shot at making it in the NFL than Anthony Richardson at a similar ceiling and overall upside. I look more at his 2021 film for what he can do in the NFL with hopefully a competent coaching staff and good weapons versus what he put on tape in 2022, where he lost Wan'Dale Robinson and his top receivers were 2 freshmen and a first-year transfer, and his offensive line was one of the worst in the country as a whole. I honestly really want Levis to go to Indianapolis because of the weapons that they have there with Michael Pittman and Jonathan Taylor, with Shane Steichen now, who I give a lot of credit to for Justin Herbert's rookie season, and Jalen Hurts' past 2 seasons. I think he would do wonders for Will Levis's transition to the NFL and get the most out of them, which is obviously going to be great for us for fantasy. But while this quarterback class is looking very strong, I think the real strength of this 2023 rookie class is actually at the tight end position. So check out my breakdown of the top tight ends in this video right up here.